Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to 119th CMAAO weekly session. We have been meeting over the last 2 years and bringing very, very important topics and speakers. Today, we have one of our favorite speaker. We had a session about last year, if I'm not wrong, about 6 months ago. And we are blessed to have another important session on nutrition, which is almost a part of our daily life. This is connected to us in every sense, every way, in every country and everywhere. So one of the most important sessions we are having today, and we are having a session on inflammation and diet. What is a correlation? And to talk about this, we have Ms. Ishi Khosla with us. She's a practicing clinical nutritionist, columnist, author, entrepreneur, and researcher. She's a founder of Celiac Society of India and Whole Food of India. We all know about Whole Food. She's a formal consultant for Max Gangaram Hospital, EHIRC. She's been facilitated by the President of India for the work in the field of nutrition. She's been awarded by numerous well-known awards, which includes FICCI Excellence Award, Women Achievers Award, and many others. She's a trustee for Food Future Foundation. She has many books under her name. Some of them are Eating at Work, Diet Doctor, The Wheat Killing You, The Cholesterol Fats. And we have her on this forum to talk about this topic. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saurabh. And it's wonderful to be back again with this distinguished audience. And thank you, CMAAO, for having me once again. So a very good morning, good afternoon to everybody around the world. And, what I noticed post-pandemic is really an infodemic, and the spotlight on diet, nutrition, health, and food has become like never before. It is assumed center stage, and the problems we are seeing today post the COVID and post vaccinations and is like really staring us in the face. And the common thread with all of these conditions is inflammation. So when Saurabh asked me, what will you speak on? I said that covers everything. So we just need to understand inflammation. And today I will be spending the next 40 minutes on dietary factors in inflammation and how to manage it. So Saurabh, can we have a share screen? Should I?
Yes, ma'am, it's already there. You can share your screen.
Let me just get the view. Is it visible? Saurabh, is it visible?
Yes. Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
Right. So to this elite audience, I don't need to just one second. Explain what is inflammation, and but still, for the sake of order, I will do that. And it is basically the host defense response that is triggered by harmful stimuli arising out of an injury or infection. So acute and chronic inflammation differ, whereas acute inflammation is protective, chronic inflammation is undesirable and the underlying cause for all the chronic inflammatory diseases. So that is where we are going to be focusing on. There is enough evidence today to suggest the relationship of almost all head to toe, all organs in our body, and inflammation and health outcomes. So whether it's a heart, whether it's the diabetic issues, respiratory issues, bone issues, metabolic issues, neurological issues, and now even things like psychological problems, developmental problems like autism, and reproductive issues are all linked to chronic inflammation. And there are all these other conditions, which in this audience, I don't need to go over the slide, but I'm sure you're all aware of it. Right from autoimmunity, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, polymyalgia, tendinitis, bursitis, laryngitis, gingivitis, gastritis, etc., otitis, celiac disease, and diverticulosis. I'll just move to this slide first. The diet, the inflammation connection with health outcomes has been now, quantified literally with diet. And let me go back to the causes of inflammation. There are, diverse causes for inflammation in our environment, the entire ecosystem. So I will, before I go to the dietary causes, just list the commonly recognized causes, which include dysbiosis of the microbiome, oxidative stress, obesity, unhealthy diets, excessive alcohol consumption, smoking, sedentary lifestyles, and on the other hand, excessive exercise, chronic infections, chronic medication, disease conditions and injury, early lifestyle, early nutrition, early life nutrition, sleep deprivation, chronic stress, and today we can even add vaccinations. But the largest cause of internal inflammation is food that we eat. And this correlation has been now with robust evidence. Scientifically, they are trying to actually document the relationship of the inflammation in the diet correlating with the health outcomes. And this index is called the Dietary Inflammatory Index, DII. And this was just developed for the actual quantification of the correlation of various conditions. And so far, this is a very recent, the index has been developed very, very recently, and we found very strong correlations with digestive cancers, with colorectal cancer, with prostate cancer, with all causes of cancer overall. So there is no, there is no doubt that today what we need to work to correct the epidemic of diseases which is staring us in the face, from all of them, I would say, we need to look at inflammation. And since diet seems to be the #1 factor, I think we can modulate and intervene very, very easily. And Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, 2,500 years ago, had proclaimed that all diseases begin in the gut. And today, all the science that we are seeing is supporting this fact. And all of this now is being studied very, very closely. The microbiota that we have, and together with all the genes, it's called the microbiome, is literally an organ itself. So the gut microbiome consists of over 100 trillion microorganisms and inhabitants that together possess 150 times more genes than that of the human genome, and thus should be considered an organ itself. So you can imagine that this is where the difference between ill health and health, between being inflamed and being normal, is determined. And these microbiota together—
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. The slides are not moving.
Are not moving?
Yeah, we are on the first slide itself.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe you need to enlarge your slides from the bottom of the.
I thought they were moving. I'm reading from there.
It's not showing up on the screen.
Okay, just let me go back. Is it there? Which one is there now?
It's still the inflammation.
Oh. I wish you told me it's moving in mine.
Can you press, do you see at the bottom corner, there is a enlarged sign? The plus and minus. There is a presentation mode in that. Can you press that? I think that will work then.
On the right side bottom?
Yeah, your right side bottom. There is before the minus sign, there is a presentation sign.
I'm just going back now.
Yeah, okay.
Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides, and but it's the same mode. Can you you need to do a presentation mode? At the bottom, on the left side, it says slide 2 of 58. On the right hand side, extreme right, there is 66, and then there is before that there is a minus. Yeah, and then next one. Yeah, next one. No. Go back. Where you were. Yeah, this one. Press this one.
Okay. Has it moved?
It still says the same thing.
Let me just write through. Hello? Can you just come in? Okay. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out what I just tried it before this and it was moving.
Yeah, in fact, we just noticed that.
So it says you can see in the first one only.
Yeah, the first one. Can you click the second one? Like the type of. Are you using Mac?
No.
Okay.
Give me a second.
Can you go on? Otherwise, can you go on the top which says slideshow and next to animation? Can we try that?
Okay, just.
Or if you can send me the presentation, I can open it myself.
I'll just do that. I think that's better.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just check.
Yeah, I think I just got something. Yeah, I got it. I'll just play it.
So
you can close it.
I'll stop sharing.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, this is strange. I'm not getting the screen. Just one sec.
Got the message. It says delivered.
Yeah, I got it. I got this thing, but I.
So while Saurabh is working on loading it. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about is the connection of the gut microbiome, the disturbed gut microbiome, and inflammation. And along with that, we will talk about the dietary constituents in our food, which are contributing to inflammation, and what are the anti-inflammatory factors and constituents, and how we can build it up to build up, to build up a robust health and reduce, and literally like having an anti-inflammatory diet. So just, this screen was not sharing. No. Okay. You got it, Saurabh?
Yes, I got it. Can you see my screen?
Hanji.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we can move to
Okay. So we can move.
So this is chronic inflammation, which we spoke about. And like I said, almost every system in our body is, every disorder is connected with chronic inflammation. So we can, with this audience, we don't need to spend too much time here. The next slide. So this also we've covered. So I think, would you want me to repeat this?
No, I think we can skip these slides.
Yeah.
So just let me know which slides we can move on.
So essentially, we can go on to the next one. Yeah, this is what I was really focusing on, that the Dietary Inflammation Index was developed to provide a quantitative means for assessing the role of diet in relation to health outcomes, ranging from blood concentration of inflammatory cytokines to chronic diseases. Unfortunately, low-grade inflammation before the onset of symptoms, etc., is very difficult to document and to measure. So the biomarkers only kick in when established disease has taken place. But certainly this is something which is important now, and at least there is a quantification and a correlation with health conditions. And the most, can I have the next slide? And the most, strong correlations have been found with cancers, with all overall cancers, with prostate, with digestive cancers, colorectal cancers, etc., and cardiac mortality, which is really not surprising. And I'm sure with time, because this is a recent development, with time, I'm sure we will have far more correlations with dietary inflammation and health. Can we have the next slide? So we're going to be discussing dysbiosis now, and we did begin the slide, which essentially is addressing the fact that all diseases begin in the gut, supported by science now. This was something which Hippocrates 2,500 years ago had said. And can I have the next slide? The microbiome, which is a combination of the microbiota along with their genes, is considered an organ itself. And I'll just repeat this. The gut microbiome consists of over 100 trillion microorganisms which inhabit the gut, which together possess 150 times more genes than the human genome, than the host, and therefore should be considered an organ in itself. So this is where the difference between ill health and health is determined. It is also where your genes can be expressed, what we call epigenetics happens. So who is going to be getting what is all controlled by the orchestra, like I say, played by the host and host environment and the microbiome. So any disturbance here is called dysbiosis. And dysbiosis is something which sets the path for the next slide, please. For the course which follows deficiencies, disorders, and diseases. So if we are in imbalance where the good and the bad balance of bacteria and fungus and viruses which are inhabiting our gut is disturbed because of faulty diets and our environment, this is what we see, and it's completely in sync with our clinical experience as well. So what are the common causes of dysbiosis and a leaky gut, which I'm going to be explaining again shortly. Food sensitivities has become very, very big because you eat food which does not work for you and you're getting sensitive or allergic to it, and it causes a state of dysbiosis. Imbalanced diets where there is too much of maybe preservatives or too much of sugar or too much of protein or the wrong kind of fats. I'll be discussing in detail all of this. Excessive alcohol, too many medications, antibiotics, hormones, chemical pesticides and pollutants. So infections and of course, viral parasitic yeast and bacterial infections. Poor digestion also is something which leads to dysbiosis. Aging in itself with the decline in cellular health and the shift in this in the bacterial balance. Stress, very, very profound effect. And vaccinations today needs to be addressed also. So today there is enough evidence to suggest that that there is a brain in the gut. So the neurological aspects of our life, the psychological and the psychiatric problems that we are seeing actually are beginning in the gut. Right from sleep to appetite to behavior, we are seeing the connections with dysbiosis. And we are able to modulate these in our clinical practice just by addressing these issues. So this is now a huge area of interest for researchers all over the world. And all of it is mediated through the gut microbiome and inflammation. So it's easy to join the dots now. And this is what happens when there is dysbiosis. You can see on the left side are the tight junctions of the epithelial cell, the mucosal membrane of the gut, which is a single cell epithelial membrane. And on the left side is the tight junctions. The cells are all tightly packed. And on the right side, you can see the gaps. These are what is referred to increased intestinal permeability, or in common language, leaky gut. And you can see here when there is the gaps, you can see the passage of undesirable constituents, like you have partially digested food, which is difficult to digest, or toxins or bacteria. All of these translocate into the bloodstream, causing poor nutritional absorption, autoimmunity, food intolerances. Why we are seeing so much of an increase in food allergies, why gluten and dairy have become hot topics today, is because of this leaky gut. Because when these molecules pass into the blood, they have an antigen effect and they cause antibody production, because the immune system doesn't recognize these particles and gets into a cascade of antibody production, which eventually leads to inflammation in the system. And all of this also goes into what we call it, enters the brain barrier also. The previous slide, just one sec, sorry. Can I just finish this? Yeah. And eventually, like I said, all of this leads to systemic inflammation. So this slide really depicts exactly where inflammation with dysbiosis happens and how this happens. Now we can move to the next slide. So some of the mechanisms here have been outlined. There is a lot of, there are several pathways, but what have been really identified so far is a zonulin effect and zonulin and inflammation. Zonulin is nothing but a group of proteins which is modulating gut permeability and chronic inflammatory diseases. It is triggered by gluten and bacterial overgrowth in the intestine. And today, this is a very recent paper published in 2020, which is basically saying exactly what I have said. All diseases begin in the leaky gut, and the role of zonulin-mediated gut permeability in the pathogenesis of many chronic inflammatory diseases. And gluten is one of the triggers of zonulin secretion, and it opens up the gut. And of course, bacterial overgrowth and dysbiosis, as we discussed, is underlying also. So can we move to the next slide? because I'm speaking about gluten, and the next slide, Saurabh. I want everyone to know that many people, it's become almost a trend that people are giving up gluten. And what is really a fact is that only 50% of these people really get the right results because of just addressing gluten and wheat. There are several other grains which mimic, or what we call, have a cross reactivity reaction, which need to be out if you are addressing wheat. So on a practical note, I just thought I'll add this. Things like soya, corn, oats, buckwheat, amaranth, and sabudana is an Indian grain, which also need to be kept out if you are eliminating gluten. The next slide, please. Dysbiosis and lipopolysaccharides, the LPS connection. LPS is something which is derived from the gram-negative bacteria in our gut. And when this translocates into the bloodstream because of the break in the barrier because of the intestinal permeability, it leads to a state called metabolic endotoxemia, which is very, very highly correlated with systemic inflammation. So again, dysbiosis and inflammation get connected. The next slide, please. And these are all very recent papers, 2020-21. Something to be said about fats and the good fats and fiber in our diet, and dysbiosis and intestinal permeability. Butyrate is a fuel for the gut epithelial cells. Our gut has a single, like I said earlier, single cell mucosal membrane, and the fuel for making this membrane of these cells healthy and strong, butyrate is one of the key constituents. And butyrate is actually derived as the name suggests, from butter and dairy fats, which including desi ghee in India, and which is somehow, maybe because of our faulty messages to the population, have been reduced and in favor of pro-inflammatory fats. And also the fiber in our diet has gone down, and the gut microbiota is able to make butyrate from the fermentation of the fiber and formation of these short chain fatty acids. However, we find that both fiber and these fats have been on the decline in the last 50 years, and may be contributing to the increase in intestinal permeability, and also explains why in our traditional medicine, in our systems of healing, ghee has a huge important therapeutic and healing role to play. So we do getting better at understanding these things and not merely dismissing them as saturated fat and etc. etc. The next slide, please. So after dysbiosis, we are going to move to the dietary factors which contribute to inflammation. Increased calories is very, very, it's an old correlation which causes inflammation. Oxidative stress, high glycemic carbohydrates, I will be talking about it, high intake of sugars and starches, intake of poor quality fats, and too much of fat, hydrogenated saturated fats, not all saturated fats. These are the ones which are to be blamed, the trans fatty acids, increase intake of meats and red meats, French fries, fried food, fast foods, which are associated with more pro-inflammation, and decline in natural antioxidants, phytonutrients, fiber, the protective fats like the omega-3 fats, and foods which are lower in, in poor consumption of arginine, and rich foods which include fish and nuts, etc. So essentially, there has been a skewed sort of balance in the intake of protective foods has gone down, and the pro-inflammatory foods have gone up. And so it's not surprising that we are seeing these inflammatory conditions. Next slide, please. So I, for the sake of easier understanding, made this slide, and for everyone to understand that we basically in nutrition have three nutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And carbohydrates, all of these have some inflammatory components. So among the carbohydrates, like I just said, excessive sugar, excessive starch, and high glycemic foods are associated with inflammation. Among the proteins, we have excessive animal protein, wheat protein because it's hard to digest, milk protein because it's difficult to break down. And protein powders is something I thought I must talk about because that has become the trend, along with the very healthy trend of physical activity and gymming and exercise has come with this baggage of protein powders, which are highly pro-inflammatory and counterproductive. And among the fats, we have trans fats, reused oils, refried food, an imbalance between the N6 and the N3 fats. I will discuss this a little bit later. Low intake of protective butter and ghee. In fact, if you look at the Mediterranean diet, which is pretty high on these kind of saturated fats and butter, and of course, dairy, and they are one of the lowest inflammatory, diets, as well as the lowest incidence of chronic inflammatory diseases. So we do now get the science better than we did earlier. The next slide, please. Yeah, we need the graph. We'll have to click again. Yeah. So here is what we call the, over the last, from 1900 to 2000, you can see the last 100 years how the trends of consumption of essential fatty acids has taken shape. And in the last part, you can see the slide in the end is 1900 to 2000, where the inflammatory N6 fats have gone up, which is the highly polyunsaturated fats. The anti-inflammatory omega-3 and 3 has gone down, and the trans fats have shot up very, very sharply. If you can just focus on the last part of this slide. So you can see the protective fats, as in the N3 fats, the good fats, have gone down. The pro-inflammatory fats have gone up. And I'm sure from 2000 to 2022, it hasn't really improved. So can we move to the next slide? So let's begin with the pro-inflammatory trans fats, which are so, silently, insidiously, they have entered our food systems and our diets on a daily basis. And these have been introduced into the diet because they provide shelf life to the foods, and they are also much cheaper for the food industry. So almost all commercially prepared food is made in either margarine or in partially hydrogenated fat, or it is formed as a result of reusing and high heating of fats. So trans fats are bad fats, which are byproduct of partial hydrogenation, a process that turns liquid fats into solid fats at room temperature by heating under pressure in the presence of metals, catalysts like nickel and hydrogen. So essentially, these have been very silently, all the biscuits that we eat commercially prepared, all the the snack food that we have contain these fats, and recognition of their ill effects has happened recently, and there is regulation on these fats pretty aggressively across the world. And these fats actually have a very high pro-inflammatory index. And you can see all the pies and the donuts and the croissants and the breads which have these fats, refried food from cheap eateries and halwais, namkeens in India, all the the sweets that we eat which are deep fried. And so majority of these eateries are using these fats, and we don't even realize it. And the next slide, please. Before I move on to explaining this slide, the irony of our lives is that trans fats have entered our diets without our realizing it, and have also been marketed as heart healthy. So because of the cholesterol, I'll just explain that in the next slide. But here is where you need to know the quantification of trans fats. Today, like I said, there is aggressive regulation by governments across the world, including in India, that trans fats should not exceed more than 1% of the total calories. And so for an average 2000 calorie diet, there should not be more than 2 grams of trans fats, but ideally there should be 0. There is no room for these fats. This next slide, please. So trans fats in foods, this is a quantification which will help you understand. So margarines were favored instead of butter as heart healthy, and margarines actually contain trans fats. And just a tablespoon of stick margarine can give you 3 grams of trans fats. A simple puri, a fried chapati, it has 8.6 grams of trans fat. French fries, an average serving gives you anything between 4 and 5 or 6 grams of trans fats, way beyond the acceptable levels. So you can see here, the next slide, how much trans fat is going into our bodies without our realizing, and how the inflammation obviously is taking place. And like I said, trans fatty acids and heart disease have been linked. In a Harvard study long ago in 1993, they did it on 85,000 American nurses, and those with the highest intake of partially hydrogenated vegetable oils had a 70% greater increase in heart attacks. And just an increase of 2 to 3 grams on a daily basis of trans fats can increase the risk to CHD by 21%. And from 3 grams to 5 grams, it goes up to 25%. It's an exponential increase. And of course, it is associated by low-grade inflammation. And ironically, these fats have been sold to the population as heart-healthy fats. The next slide, please. So I'm not going to get into the biochemistry and the mechanisms. We can skip this slide, but they are very clear. They increase C-reactive protein and insulin resistance. At the end of the day, this will take a long time to discuss. Can we move to the next slide? Let's move to the good fats and, in terms of protective fats, omega-3 fats, and the omega-6 fats. Now, what are these? Basically, these are all forms of what we call polyunsaturated fats. And there has been a very unfriendly and I would say unfortunate balance between the N6 and the N3. Can we have the next slide? Thanks to the introduction or replacement of traditional fats from our kitchen, moving on to highly polyunsaturated fats like sunflower and corn and soya bean, etc. This balance has been really messed up. And you can see here, the optimum ratio actually should be 6:1, should be 2:1 or 3:1, the N6 and N3 ratio. And historically, it has been 3 or 4:1, which was very good, which means the pro-inflammatory and the anti-inflammatory benefits can be balanced. In Europe, these are latest figures, 15:1. US is 25:1. India stands at 40:1. And India used to be almost like 200 plus, I have read somewhere, is-1. So highly skewed balance between the N6 and N3 ratios, and lowering this ratio clearly reduces inflammation. So can we have the next slide? So this is where the tilted, the skewed balance is. And if we lack key nutrients and we eat unhealthy diets, this balance is really out of sync. And very easy to bring back by getting back into, which I will just discuss. Can we have the next slide? This is a slide which is just showing on the right and the left. We have on the right a normal functioning cell where the cell wall is absolutely soft and flexible and the nutrients are entering very easily. And on the left, we have a rigid cell wall, which is not allowing the nutrients to get absorbed. So this is the way omega-3 fats, when there is deficiency, it goes into what we call rigid membranes. And when we have optimum levels of omega-3 fats, the cell membranes become flexible and soft. The next slide, please. And this affects almost all our body functions, and resolution of inflammation happens when we have this icosapentaenoic acid and the DHA, dexahexanoic acid. And on the left, you can see the AA is arachidonic acid, which is the polyunsaturated fat, which in excess is highly pro-inflammatory. Can we have the next slide? So how do we get these omega-3 fats or the EPAs and DHAs back into our diet to restore this balance? Of course, for all the listening audience who is in close to marines and oceans can get fish and fish oils, but for those who are not, it may be easy to also get enough through plant sources. And these are where these are very, very concentrated flax seeds and mustard seeds, sesame seeds, even green leafy vegetables, some grains like bajra, soya bean, kidney beans, and some dals, methi seeds, fenugreek seeds, and chia seeds. And I think chia seeds have really shot to fame. Flax seeds have shot to fame for the right reasons. And taking these in our traditional Indian context are really not difficult, because they were a part of our cuisine. We just need to ensure that we have them on a regular basis in the right quantities. So the next slide, please. Now we address some of the micronutrients which have been associated with inflammation. We have vitamin B6, B12, vitamin C, D, magnesium, and selenium. I do have slides on explanations, but I will not spend too much time there. But clearly, these deficiencies of these have been associated with inflammation. And something which has been ignored for a long time is vitamin B6. And we know that today therapeutic doses of 40 mg of vitamin B6 can bring down inflammation and oxidative stress. And this has been now documented in several studies. The next slide, please. We can skip these. I think we spoke also last time about these, so we can skip these. The next, we can move ahead. Yes, next. We'll talk about the polyphenol shift. Basically, polyphenols, again, are integral to our diets, which are rich in plant foods, which are rich in whole plant food diets, which were the traditional diets. But thanks to the processed foods that have entered and the shift in diets, these really have taken a beating. And polyphenols really are found in all the vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, oils, spices. And so it's not difficult to get them, but they really are not as they used to be. And sadly, even in the in the fruits and the vegetables in the food themselves, we have seen a decline. So typically we aim to have 5 vegetables or fruits a day, but really that reality is not more than 3. There is this study which said mid-Victorians ate 10 portions a day, and traditional societies, the blue zones of the world, they still eat that kind of portion of vegetables and fruits and the good fats. And today they say that heritage fruits and vegetables contained 3 times more polyphenols. And can we just scroll down on this? Yes. And this is a very unfortunate statistic which says these are estimates that polyphenol intakes have fallen in our diets by 90%. And these are really, really highly anti-inflammatory. And they not only, can we have the next slide? They not only are anti-inflammatory, they're immunomodulatory and also affect our gene expression. So they have epigenetic benefits as well. So we really need to boost up these foods in our diet, and vegetables, fruits, spices, oils, honey, all of these should be there in abundance. And one of the easiest ways of practically dealing with this is what I say: when you serve yourself, at least half the plate should be full of these vegetables, and a rainbow colored diet, which has almost all the colors in the rainbow, at least 5 to 7, if not 7, on a daily basis. And I also go on to say that the next slide, that at least dedicate one meal. Oh, no, the previous slide again. Dedicate one meal to this food group, which is like having just vegetables, soup, salad in one meal, or just a breakfast of fruits predominantly. So that way you ensure that you get the right portions of these highly valuable foods. The next slide, please. Since we did mention early life nutrition in causes of inflammation, I have just put this slide to correlate adult inflammation with early maternal malnutrition and maternal obesity. Placental crossovers of antibodies also happen in women who are food sensitive. So you begin with the disadvantage. Particularly, we've seen gluten, antibodies to gluten crossing over through breast milk and type of birth and breastfeeding. So all of these are, determinants of inflammation in adult life. Next slide, please. Since nitric oxide has shot to fame, I just thought I would again put this in a different perspective for you. I did have this slide last time as well, that diet high in nitrates increases nitric oxide, which are found in beets and greens, and L-arginine and L-citrulline are amino acids which boost the natural production of nitric oxide. And among the lifestyle practices, even pranayama, which is breathing, a specific kind of yogic breathing, improves the nitric oxide, which have a very, very powerful anti-inflammatory effect. The next slide. Beets are really very high on this, and it's not difficult to take one beetroot a day, I would suggest. Now, something about obesity and inflammation. We all know that obesity is an inflammatory condition, but I also believe, and now there is research to suggest that inflammation is also being caused by obesity. I will discuss that, but where we need to really understand this slide is the apple and the pear shape. So location of fat more than the BMI sometimes can be a determinant of inflammation through the visceral fat. So excess visceral fat or central obesity or apple shape is inflammatory even in the absence of high BMI. So this is what we call thin fat people, who are, they don't weigh too much, but they do store fat in the internal organs, which is associated with inflammation. The next slide, please. I don't think I need to go into what the targets should be, but clearly the WHO and the bodies have been more strict with the South Asian population, and more than 80 centimeters for women and more than 90 centimeters for men is considered excess, the measurement on the waist. So this I just explained that inflammation can be a cause for obesity as well, and then eventually leads to more obesity through different pathways. And I see that, beyond calories, obesity has been traditionally treated with calorie counting. But today we see that people who are even on low calorie diets with a lot of expenditure through exercise are in an inflamed condition. They are unable to lose weight because of the presence of inflammation in their body, and food sensitivities, etc., are big culprits here. Obesity and atherosclerosis and inflammation. I think we just need to know for the listening audience here that it is a form of inflammation which impairs also endothelial cell function, which is predisposes to atherosclerosis. The next slide, please. This is again a biochemical pathway. Let's forget this. We will not discuss this in detail. It's not necessary. Now let's talk about carbohydrates and the variations in blood sugar levels and insulin levels in our daily life. This is just a graph which is showing the diurnal variation from breakfast to dinner. Essentially, this is all mediated by the kind of carbohydrate. The next slide, please. By what we call the glycemic index, which measures the ability of a food to raise blood sugar levels, and of course the total carbohydrate intake. So these insulin secretions as well as the blood sugar levels vary because of these two factors, and of course our hormonal variations as well. So foods which have high glycemic index, which shoot up the sugars and the insulin rapidly, are pro-inflammatory. And some of the foods which we know, like honey, glucose, etc., have high inflammation. So even things like rice and wheat have high glycemic index. But here I must say that glycemic index, or the ability of a food to raise blood sugars, can be modulated by mixed meals. By taking more fat, more fiber, or more protein, or mixing it, blunts the response of the individual, of the meal rather than the individual food. So even if, say for instance, honey has a high glycemic index, but if I'm taking it with something else, some fatty food, then it will vary and it will go down. So this needs to be understood in a context and not in absolute form. But can we go to the next slide? But this is clear that if you are eating too much of sugar and high starchy food, and you are increasing your sugars very rapidly, there is a very clear pro-inflammatory response here. It causes postprandial hyperglycemia, glycation of the proteins, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, endothelial dysfunction, oxidative stress, and of course inflammation, leading to diabetes, diabetic retinopathy, AMD, and CVD. So essentially, this is just to document the fact that too much of sugar and too much of starch and too much of carbohydrate together can be a problem. And the idea is to mix the meals and combine them. So it's not like you don't take rice, but you take it as a part of your meal, or you exercise to blunt the response. Next slide, please. This we will again not need to discuss. We've already explained this. Low glycemic diets have an anti-inflammatory effect, and this is a biochemical pathway. We can skip this. Next slide, Saurabh. So something to be said about fasting, because also fasting has become a trend, and intermittent fasting is becoming very, very popular. And this was again a part of our traditional societies. Almost all traditional communities across the world have always an integral part of their practices, which is some kind of fast through the year. And in India, of course, we can boast of several kinds of weekly fasts and monthly fasts and quarterly fasts and navratras, etc. So these were not without reason, because we now know the effect it has, on a positive effect it has on the body, and the inflammation. And these are recent studies. Mount Sinai's researchers discovered that fasting reduces inflammation and improves chronic inflammatory diseases, which is showing profound benefits for longevity, fighting disease, and of course, mediated, even intermittent fasting is now showing these kind of results. The next slide, please. These are the mechanisms. It reduces the circulating monocytes in healthy humans. Fasting reduces monocyte metabolic and inflammatory activity. Hepatic energy sensing regulates homeostatic monocyte, while CCL2 is a kind of a cytokine. Fasting improves inflammatory diseases without compromising antimicrobial immunity, which is very, very important, because most people say, oh, if we eat less, we will become malnourished, or it will affect our immune system. So fasting does not defies that, and does it actually boosts your immunity and reduces inflammation. And caloric restriction, of course, from times immemorial has been found to be useful in longevity and mediated through improving inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. The next slide, please. So how does one know that one has chronic inflammation? So actually it is chronic systemic inflammation is very, very slow. It begins very early in life, and there is first tissue damage and then the disease. And it has a long, what we call preclinical phase, which can be into decades. So it's very difficult in those times to document it and to have markers which are positive. And we see that in clinical practice where the patient has no marker which is really elevated, but we know that the problem, he already has some kind of a chronic inflammatory disease. So there are no markers in early stages, but typically we can see the blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure is an indication, varicose veins, hemorrhoids, accelerated skin aging, itis, which is basically feeling very sleepy post-meal. It's called food coma, depression, allergy, which is really interesting because we never really thought that it could be correlated with inflammation. But certainly these are simple ways of assessing a chronic inflammation. The next slide, please. But there are biomarkers of inflammation in clinical practice. There are several of them. I haven't put them all down here because we don't use them in our practice. They are more for research. And in our clinical practice, when CRP is raised, that means you really have, very high levels of inflammation. But these are, these we see in very, like I said, advanced cases and advanced diseases. Very often, mostly we find these normal, but this is one of the markers which is well known. ESR, white cell counts, albumin, fecal calprotectin, raised ferritin and B12. I put these down, raised ferritin and B12, because we do see these and sometimes they are hard for the clinician to interpret. And I pretty much I'm able to deal with them once we improve the diet, we make it anti-inflammatory. The raised ferritin and B12, which are unexplained, absolutely come down. And raised ferritin in very often is associated with low hemoglobins. So I just thought I'll put that down. Of course, needless to say that when you have a high cholesterol, high LDL, high uric acid, or IL-6, these are all metabolic diseases which are now associated with inflammation. So I would put them as markers of inflammation in clinical practice. The next slide, please. So anti-inflammatory foods, we have spoken a lot about these. Dedicate one meal to this group. And also introduction of probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. Next slide, please. So these are listing some of the anti-inflammatory foods, which include the antioxidants, vitamins we spoke about, the cold-pressed oils, extra virgin, say even coconut oil has gone out of fashion, now it's coming back. Olive oil, sesame oil, mustard oil, castor oil has really gone out of fashion, but a very profound anti-inflammatory oil, fish oil, and butter and ghee. Turmeric, ginger, herbs like Boswellia serrata, tea, coffee, which have flavonoids and loads, and even chocolate have loads of polyphenols, resveratrol in wines, and of course all the brightly colored vegetables and fruits. The next slide, please. So basically, this is just a summary to sort of enumerate what anti-inflammatory diet should look like and should be. It should be high on nutrition, antioxidants, polyphenols, and typically what we call a rainbow diet. It should have probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics and fermented foods to improve the microbiota. Gut health should be addressed. It should be good digestion and address food sensitivities. It be rich in good fats, adequate protein, fiber, and fluids. It should be low in glycemic index and carbohydrates and free sugars. It should be zero or low, very, very low on trans fats, I would say zero, and processed foods, avoiding excess alcohol in moderation, and of course, an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, which goes without saying. So I think the last slide is just highlighting all that we have spoken in the last 1 hour, that the road to good health is actually paved with an anti-inflammatory diet and a healthy gut. So I'll conclude here and we'll be happy to have questions if there are. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for exhaustive and very well presented. I think nobody can do justice to this topic. So we have our chair, Dr. Chong, and all other speakers here. So we open this forum for question answers, and over to you, Dr. Chong.
Hi, Prof. Khosla. Lovely presentation, and this topic is actually very close to my heart, because I did an internet startup, and we have done about 400 over patients, and we put a Libre on them, and we log all their foods, and we came up with some fascinating data on what they eat and how it's damaging their health. So our problem here in Singapore is street food. You know, street food is cheap, but it's got a lot. It delivers only two things: flavors and carbs. And you know, it's a disaster for our chronic disease situation here.
Mm-hmm.
And our diabetic rate is has gone up in the last 3 years due to COVID as well. You know, we've kind of lost a war on diabetes. We declared a war on diabetes, but we've lost it. Obesity is up, diabetes is up, and I think this is across a lot of nations across the world are facing this tsunami of chronic diseases driven by just lousy diets. And street food in this part of the world is a big problem. The countries around us. So yeah, it's pretty much a topic very, very close to my heart. I took snapshots of quite a number of your slides. And incidentally, I also met somebody yesterday. They came to give a talk on DNA methylation and something called a biological clock versus a chronological clock. And interestingly, I was talking to the PhD researcher at this place, and they actually mentioned that blueberries, for example, have a tremendous. They found that it has a tremendous effect on methylation of DNA. I mean, reversing it. So this is a very exciting area. Curcumin also has a very powerful effect at the DNA level.
Absolutely.
Thoughts?
Absolutely.
Your thoughts? Yes, carry on.
No, I was just agreeing with what you said. Please carry on.
Yeah, so I make sure I eat a punnet of blueberries every day for lunch.
Yes, and why not? And like I said, these have epigenetic, they can modulate our genes. So these are so profound. And unfortunately, we've just gone in for, but when you said the diets are faulty, I just feel that people have been innocent. They have not realized what has happened to their food thanks to the industrialization of food. We didn't do it to ourselves. It just happened. For instance, modern wheat just changed. Wheat itself has an immunogenic potential for some people who have celiac disease or have an allergy. But today we are seeing the reaction in people who don't have celiac disease because, in the 60s, we had the high yielding varieties entering. And today the scientists from the agricultural universities are agreeing that the modern wheat, which is post 60s, is immunogenic. So, I mean, the public at large is so, unclueless. Professionals are clueless, but yes, this industry has really taken a toll on our health, and we need to understand the connections and, and now it's all actually worsened with the pandemic,
Prof, and Dr. Kuzi, you have a question for Prof?
Yeah, thank you so much. Very, very good presentation. Just would like two questions. One remark. You mentioned vaccines, but you didn't say anything. And my question would be: how do you, in a poor community, what would you advise them to take, you know, that it's not expensive, that
Yes.
you know that they will get their nutrition? Thanks.
That's very good. I didn't get the first part of what you said. Toxins? I did.
Vaccination.
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 Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely, very good question and great point here, because we are talking about blueberries and avocados and olive oil, but that's really not the reality for the masses. And so what do they do? And to be honest, what I see here in India, at least in the villages, they are far better off in their overall health. I'm not saying they're not having health problems. They are having nutritional deficiencies and even the chronic inflammatory diseases that we are seeing, but in a much lower, much lesser way than before. I mean, much less than the urban population. So in the rural population, just they grow their own food. So for anybody who is looking at sort of a low income sort of solution, eat your food with, which is grown without pesticides or which is grown as naturally as possible. Have a fresh vegetables which have a very high polyphenol content. They, the rural population is able to grow their own patches. And in fact, even in the urban today, there are, the suggestions to do farming at home on walls and in whatever spaces are available. So eat as fresh as possible and avoid all the processed. When these populations need not have all the biscuits and the junk snacks, even the instant noodles, which are very cheap. Like Dr. Chan said, they are very cheap and attractive to the poor, but they should be somehow brought away from those and have simple grains and vegetables. Even say greens all across the world are not expensive. What we call them sags in India. Though the sags are available and growing very easily, and they're very high on polyphenols and, like I said, in the nitric oxide factor. But we don't have to get into the science of everything. We just need to understand that these people need simple solutions. So getting them away from the food industry produced food, packed food, to eating simple food which they used to eat, even if they are living in poor conditions in cities, that would help. And of course, the food systems need to change. There is no two ways about it. We need to provide these cheaper solutions to everybody, and simple things, even things like, I say, a carrot, a cucumber, a tomato, green leafy vegetables, a handful of, say, chickpeas, chanas we call it. It's cheap. Or monkey nuts, which is cheap. And even if you do that much, you have some kind of protection. And of course, and alcohol and all those things, smoking, need to be addressed. But there are no simple solutions here, but solutions can be found. And to talk about vaccination, every vaccination is accompanied by profound changes in the gut microbiome. And mostly the host is able to deal with it, but certainly there has been a conversation now on a post-vaccination diet, which can not only boost the effect of the vaccination and make it better for you, but also protect you from the dysbiosis, which is accompanying the vaccination. In fact, I'm using this time to tell you that one of the Russian scientists in the early days, when the vaccinations had just started in Russia, sent out an advisory for no alcohol for 3 months post-vaccination. And he was really poo-pooed and asked to keep quiet. But certainly there was merit, and we understand why he said that. So vaccinations come with their own baggage and they are needed in the pandemic. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that if you've had a vaccination, you need to lower or I would say raise the pro-inflammatory components through probiotics and prebiotics and an anti-inflammatory diet.
Prof,
just to add, Dr. Chan, just to add over here, I think Dr. KK used to be very close to you on this front, and he used to say one subject on this, that street food is not cheap, it's expensive because you need to buy that street food. What is cheap food? You always need to buy that cheap food. What is the cheap food? Is carrot. You can go buy a carrot. I don't know, in India, like we buy ghee, tori and all that stuff. It's the cheapest food and it's the most healthiest food.
Yes.
So I remember the statement he said once: street food is not a cheap food. You have to buy that street food. The cheap food, we recommend you to eat cheap food, which is like, and also like a lot of food like Mexican, Lebanese and all those foods are derived from the Indian foods. Like Lebanese is more of chickpeas and Mexican is more of beans and all that stuff. So it's added with a lot of vegetables, a lot of first kind of vegetables. Those are all, you can make it as a very cheap food at your house, and which is good for healthy things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about the Indian tradition, I will definitely want to share something which is so integral, cheap and traditional in our culture. Khichdi. Khichdi is a super bowl actually, which is a combination of rice and dal, lentils. It's cheap. It's cheap like for anybody. The cheapest food. Add your greens to that, and even if you were to eat it twice a day, you are eating very good food, because rice has certain gut healing properties anyway. And when you cook it the way it's, if somebody is sick in India, the first thing that is changed is food is removed and khichdi is given. So it's like a rice, like a rice soup with lentils. And I think that's a super bowl. I mean, it doesn't have to be restricted to the poor, anyone today. And I think Mr. Modi is really propagating different kinds of khichdis as the national food. And combine that with the banana and combine that with some nuts and chanas and some great, like I said, the carrots and cucumbers, etc. It's really not difficult, but it's so attractive for the poor man to grab that biscuit or the packet of packed food, which is cheap. So
yeah, I always tell my patients, try to eat more home cooked meals.
Yes.
I mean, that already helps the situation tremendously. And probably the lentils delay the absorption of the sugar, right?
Yes.
The glycemic index of the rice.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question about alcohol? Because alcohol exists in nature due to fermentation of fruit, and of course the caveman in the old days just plucked the fruit off and ate it. And so we still possess the ability to metabolize alcohol. But what is your take on? I know when alcohol enters a cell is a toxin. They have to prioritize, get rid of the toxin, and so your fat, carbohydrate, and lipid metabolism is put on hold. And hence, we found that people who drank a lot of alcohol, especially late at night, due to our Abbott Libre studies, actually went hypo at 3-4 a.m. in the morning, because obviously, the body has to get rid of the alcohol first. What are your thoughts on alcohol and general inflammation and metabolism?
So very rightly said. I would just extrapolate this to traditional societies, because you began there, and most of the traditional societies do consume wine or some form of alcohol, and they are longer lived and they have no adverse effects. But I think the bottom line is moderation, number
Yes.
one, how much you have. So the same thing can be good or bad depending on the quantity. It's like carbs. We need the carbs, but too much of carb is wrong. Is inflammatory. So basically, I would just use it as what has been said over and over again: moderation. And people who have chronic diseases, have compromises in the liver, and in general are immunocompromised, definitely need not take it to get that benefit.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, so one question we have got, you talked about omega-3, omega-6. What about the black seed oil? Does it, like a lot of people cannot have a fish oil or the omega capsule which has a fish oil in it. So is that black seed oil also a very good for?
Excellent. It is got a good blend of omega-6 and omega-3. It has more omega-6, but it is very high on antioxidants. very, very high on antioxidants. So it is a fabulous oil, in fact, used for therapeutic benefits in places where it is used.
Prof, what are your own superfoods? What do you eat regularly? What are your priorities?
Well, I would say variety. And but I have to say that I gave up certain grains, which I did mention in my slide as well, about 10 years ago, when I was just about 49, maybe now 11 years ago. And I felt profound differences in my health. And so elimination was one thing I did, but addition is typically ensuring I don't eat processed food. I don't eat, things which are synthetic with colors and anything like that. And, a regular Indian diet and a Western diet, a very mixed diet. So variety is what I would say is key, and do address my gut health in simple ways. I'm not hooked on to probiotics, but certainly if there is insult in my food, I look for it. And yeah, pretty much. And my supplements, ensure that whatever, like we didn't speak about magnesium, but I know that magnesium is a very unrecognized, and sadly so. So that is something I take, and vitamin D and all of that. So I pretty much shared what I do.
We
Magnesium,
have some more questions.
Yeah, magnesium, I found all my people who drink alcohol and caffeine, I make them buy magnesium, because I found actually measuring magnesium in a number of my patients, quite a number of them have magnesium levels, and they have cramps, lots of cramps.
Yes. So glad that you brought this point out, because tissue levels of magnesium, cellular levels of magnesium and blood levels are completely different. So very often you will find normal magnesium levels, and the patient has typically all the symptoms of magnesium deficiency, which get corrected on supplementation. And so that is a problem with magnesium. Even the patient or the clinician both say, oh, magnesium in the blood is fine, so we don't need magnesium. No, you don't realize you're getting migraines, you're getting constipation, you have insomnia, you have anxiety, you have stress, you have all those cramps, but the blood levels are fine, because the human body is an amazing machinery. We are storing the calcium and magnesium in the skeletal system, and as per demand, and we can't do without magnesium. So it is for the heart rhythm as well. So the body will constantly, it's like your working capital, it has to be there. And when you find blood levels deficient, that's when you are critically low.
Yeah.
So that is really the end stage of deficiencies.
Yes. We also measure quite a lot of ferritin in our patients, and we found that despite people having single-digit ferritins, below 30 microgram is considered low, but we've found a lot of women with single-digit ferritin levels, and their hemoglobin is normal. Hemoglobin is 12, 13.
Yes.
So the body really defends to the last, gram of hemoglobin. Before they, I think, I've had patients with single-digit ferritin levels. In fact, just one yesterday. Terrible.
Yes. And when they're highly inflamed, their ferritins are very high.
Oh yes.
With low hemoglobins.
Yes.
So I remember a clinician who called me up and he said, what can we do? How do we supplement this person? Ferritin is so high, crazy. I said, she's just inflamed, and she actually had underlying celiac disease, which was just diagnosed. So hemoglobin was 7 or 8 and her ferritin was 300 or 400. And the doctor was very psyched. I said, no, this is all inflammation. Yes. You give her the iron, and sure enough, within a month, the ferritin had normalized and the iron had gone up.
Yeah. And those who drank excessively all had very high ferritin levels, or several hundred.
There you are.
Yeah. So yes, Prof. Russell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Prof, for this excellent informative talk. Can I ask you, I'm Russell D'Souza from Melbourne, Australia. Can I ask you the role, you did put there zinc and selenium. Now, zinc, we've seen it as, it has some effect on just common flu and so forth, but you've put it as anti-inflammatory. Well, can you tell me more about that?
Yes, the mechanisms are very, they are detailed, and I haven't mentioned them and put them here. But certainly, zinc is an ionophore, and it helps in the transportation of certain nutrients, etc. So essentially, when you are the immunomodulating, let me put it this way, the immunomodulating impact of zinc is because of its inflammatory effect, anti-inflammatory effect.
And similar to selenium too, is it?
Again, a detoxifying effect.
Right.
Prof, I remember that the selenium deficiency was discovered in the Cornell China project, something like that, right? There was a Cornell China diet project, which discovered that selenium was quite deficient in many parts of rural China. And that study also showed that a rural diet was actually one of the healthiest in the world. Yeah,
that's exactly what we said.
Yeah, what you said just now.
Yes,
amazing.
So there are a few more questions, but in the interest of the time, I will just ask the last question which I've got, because this is for the masses. We talk about milk, dairy products.
Saurabh, I'll just interrupt you, Professor Russell. I will send you the slide which I didn't share on zinc if you specifically require it.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you, Saurabh.
Yeah.
Saurabh, you have my presentation. You can send it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. I noticed that zinc thing. Yeah, I will send it. But if you allow me, I can send the entire presentation to the CMAAO Pro.
Please, I'll be happy.
Thank you.
So one of the questions which I was asking is that about the milk. There are a lot of debate about milk. There's a lot of myths and a lot of discussions going on of the milk, whether milk is good for you guys, not cow milk replacing with the oat milk, or let's say soya milk, or all that stuff. So what is really, like, if somebody is having a milk every day, do you really think cow milk can be replaced or should be replaced, or is it not worth it?
My answer, this is such a common question, but my answer is always, it is case to case. I cannot make any recommendation for anyone, but certainly 2 or 3 things need to be said. I would say 50% of those people who have a gluten intolerance are also dairy intolerant. And I'm not saying lactose intolerant, I'm talking of dairy. Lactose intolerance, again, is something which has been long established and recognized. And the gradual decline in the body's ability to handle milk sugar declines, and you have bloating and those kind of things. But that's really not inflammatory in nature. It's not dangerous. It's not something which, it just passes off. You have a little. But what is a problem is casein, that dairy protein, which behaves like gluten in many bodies. And perhaps we don't know the real mechanisms, have not been elucidated. But certainly casein is a huge molecule, and it crosses even the blood-brain barrier. And people who have neurological problems, etc., can be triggered by milk protein. So we don't know your gut microbiome. We don't know your state of the gut or your chronic conditions. But certainly, say for instance, in autism, it's called a gluten-free, casein-free diet, which means both the grains and the milk protein are out. And that means even yogurt is out, and even probiotic drinks which are dairy based are out. And if you have cow's milk intolerance, then of course these are in any case out, but mostly kids grow out of it. And the issue of the association of, say, diabetes and maybe other autoimmune problems with dairy are now being studied more and more. And in my practice, all I can say is, for instance, if somebody who has a high TSH, 16, 17, and we put them off gluten and dairy, their TSH normalizes. Then once their gut heals, we are able to give them small amounts of dairy, but not full blown. For my diabetics, if we study their sugars, the days they have dairy, most of them who are advanced, long-standing diabetes, their sugars will go up. But since this is a medical audience, I'm going to share another aspect of this, that when we go off, say, gluten and these grains, and we reintroduce them, there is the memory cell in the immune system, which will always react and tell us that this was unfriendly, and they will give us an inflammatory response. However, with dairy, it does not affect the memory cells. So if you have healed your gut after a year or two, if you have dairy, chances are that you will tolerate it. It doesn't give you that kind of an inflammation, but if you have too much of it, or have it too regularly, maybe it affects you. But it's difficult for me to answer that question for everybody.
Fascinating. Thank you, Prof. Saurabh, are we good for time?
Yeah, I think it's already very late. We have more questions, but I think the next session would otherwise we will not have her in the next session. So
Yeah.
we will keep some questions for the next session.
Thank you, Prof. And it's a pleasure to have you back here with us again. And we enjoyed today's session so much. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you another time. And we have a lot more burning questions for you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khosla. Very, very nice session. I think this is the longest session we had today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.